Ukraine's defense is crumbling. Russian attacks are more lethal than ever. For the last 2 years, Ukraine has been able to hold the fort, but now it seems like its defense is caving in. And why are we saying that? Because Ukraine is shooting down a far smaller proportion of Russian missile attacks than it was earlier in the war. Have a look at these numbers. In the past 6 months, Ukraine managed to intercept around 46% of Russian missiles. Last month, this figure further fell to 30%. A year ago, the interception rate stood at 73%. As you can see, there has been a steep fall in Ukraine's ability to block Russian missiles. This is according to Western media's analysis of Ukraine's own data. Russia, meanwhile, has significantly ramped up its assault. Over the past 6 months, Moscow fired around 45% more drones and missiles than in the 6 months before. It also doubled the number of Shahed drones attacks, over 2,600 to be specific. It also fired 114 ballistic and 46 hypersonic Kinzhal and Zircon missiles. Last year, the figures were 33 and 27. On top of that, Moscow has also repurposed air defense systems to attack Ukraine and used them to fire 175 missiles into Ukraine this year alone. We are talking about S-300 and S-400 air defense systems here. And how much of it was Ukraine able to intercept? It's pitiful to say the least. It could shoot down just 10% of the ballistic missiles. And as for S-300 and S-400 missiles, it has failed to intercept any of them. Not even a single one. And why is that? Why is Ukraine's defense failing so massively? You see, the Western-supplied Patriot systems are Ukraine's only reliable way to shoot down ballistic S-300 and hypersonic missiles, but Kiev has only a handful of them. And to top it off, it has exhausted the ammunition used in these systems. Russia, meanwhile, is increasingly firing harder to hit weapons. And with that, it's not only destroying Ukrainian infrastructure and cities, but also sapping Kiev's already sparse supply of missiles. And what is Ukraine doing about all of this? Well, there is little it can do but wait for the West to send more Patriots. And this, by the way, can take anywhere between 2 months and several years, depending on whether they will come from existing stockpiles or manufactured on fresh orders. The air war may now come down to which side can outlast the other on missile supplies, and the odds don't seem to be in Ukraine's favor. It is dependent on its Western allies, which are struggling to send missiles on time. Russia, on the other hand, has its own stockpiles, and it's also capable of producing 170 missiles every month. Not to forget the drones and missiles it is getting from its allies. And if the numbers are to be believed, Russia is dominating the battlefield. Then what explains what's going on the political front? If things are going well for Russia, why is Putin shaking up the Kremlin security team? That's right, he has sacked Sergei Shoigu from his long-time position as the country's defense minister. Nobody saw this coming. He is a long-standing Putin confidant. He has served as the defense minister for over 11 years. Now, Shoigu will lead Russia's Security and Defense Council. It's a consultative body that advises the president. But what is the reason behind this? We cannot see. But there are signs that cannot be ignored. Last month itself, Russian officials opened a ground-shaking criminal case into one of Shoigu's deputies. I'm talking about Timur Ivanov. He oversaw military construction projects, including the rebuilding of the destroyed Ukrainian city of Mariupol, now occupied by Russia. For years, he lived high on the hog, flaunted his access to Saint-Tropez villas, yachts, Rolls-Royces, until last month when he got arrested for allegedly taking bribes worth $11 million. Now, this was an ominous sign for Shoigu because Shoigu is himself no stranger to luxury. In fact, according to an investigation by anti-corruption campaigners, he lived in a $15 million pagoda-style complex outside Moscow. It was registered to his sister-in-law and built on land bought by his 18-year-old daughter. I don't need to spell this out. The mansion's ownership was disguised. What's more, since the Ukraine war broke out in 2022, the armed forces under Shoigu have been plagued by rumors of careless spending, mishandling resources, and incompetence. And now President Putin has stepped in to replace him with an experienced technocrat. The reins of the Defense Ministry will now go to former Vice Prime Minister Andrei Belosov. He previously served as the Economic Development Minister and an advisor to Putin. The Kremlin indicated that Belosov was the man for the job, as military spending ballooned to 6.6% of the Russian GDP. Belosov's appointment means that Shoigu moves to head the Security Council. Despite the sense that Shoigu has been ousted, he will still remain in a high-ranking position. The question is Putin trying to keep Shoigu close yet detached from the system? Who's to say? America is getting tough with Benjamin Netanyahu. Why do I say that? Because of what Antony Blinken has said. According to the U.S. Secretary of State, the U.S. may block more weapon systems to Israel if it goes ahead with the ground offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Not just that, Blinken emphasized on the quote-unquote horrible loss of life of innocent civilians. It is a horrible loss indeed. As per Gaza's health ministry, the death toll has now passed at least 35,000 Palestinians. 35,000. This is a serious humanitarian crisis. The Secretary of State also said that he was concerned that any further ground captured by Israel would create a vacuum that's likely to be filled by chaos, by anarchy, and ultimately by Hamas again. Now, before I go on, let me tell you why these statements are extremely significant. This is some of the strongest public criticism coming in from the U.S. government so far of Israel's Gaza assault. So America is getting tough with Israel, but the question is that enough? The thing is, Blinken's remarks do send out a strong message. The message is clear. America will not take lightly Israel's defiance over the Rafah offensive. But is this all that America can do at this point? And will this really deter Benjamin Netanyahu? On Friday, the Biden administration said that Israel's use of U.S.-provided weapons in Gaza likely violated international humanitarian law, but that wartime conditions prevented U.S. officials from determining that for certain in specific airstrikes. And that again was a sign of the U.S. hardening its stance towards Israel. But then the caveat that the administration was not able to link specific U.S. weapons to individual attacks by Israeli forces in Gaza could give the administration leeway in any future decision on whether to restrict provisions of offensive weapons to Israel. According to Blinken, Israel needs to have a clear, credible plan to protect civilians, which, according to him, they have not seen. He also, in fact, warned that Hamas was already seeing a resurgence due to the lack of a coherent, durable plan for Gaza. By the way, Biden on Saturday said that a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war would be possible, quote-unquote, tomorrow if Hamas gave up the hostages seized in its October 7 attack. And Hamas released a statement saying that the remarks by Biden were a setback to negotiations. Let me also tell you about what's happening on the ground. An explosion and several large plumes of smoke were seen rising over Gaza from southern Israel on Sunday as the Israeli military ordered the evacuation of civilians in the southern city of Rafah. Israel sent tanks into eastern Jabalia in the northern Gaza Strip after a night of heavy aerial and ground bombardments, killing 19 people and wounding dozens of others, as per the health officials. So the big question still remains. While America is getting tough with Benjamin Netanyahu, will that deter him? It is the 13th of May, and if you are a cocktail lover, here's a reason to say cheers and sip one perhaps. Even on Monday, because it is World Cocktail Day, a celebration of the art of mixology. After all, cocktails are not merely beverages. They are expressions of craftsmanship and flavors. The roots of this day tracing back to 1806. That year, the Balance and Columbian Repository, an upstate New York newspaper, first coined the term cocktail. It described cocktail as a stimulating concoction comprising spirits, sugars, waters and bitters. And where did the word come from? The Oxford English Dictionary tells us that the original use of cocktail was to describe a horse with a tail like a cock's. As in, it stays stuck up rather than hanging down. And this would happen when the racehorse was a mixed breed. And this sense of cocktail then came to mean a mixed or an adulterated drink. The drinks were initially inspired by British punches, which contained spirits, fruit juices, spices in big bowls. Then on, it has been a rather interesting journey. In the 1920s, during the era of prohibition in the US, illegal speakeasies proliferated. And what did these clandestine jazz venues serve? Solace and connection, and refuge from alcohol restrictions in the form of cocktails. The decade changed, and the 1930s witnessed the emergence of the Rainbow Room in New York. It was a luxurious club frequented by elite clientele eager to indulge in post-prohibition cocktails. And since then, the club has closed and reopened. It has been restructured and renovated. But it was its revival in 1987 by Dale DeGroff that revitalized interest in classic cocktails and inspired a modern renaissance in mixology. The movement soon spread across the world. It has changed and evolved, become more refined. Today, bartenders, mixologists, cocktail enthusiasts focus on quality ingredients, precise techniques, also creative presentation. They use everything from exotic fruits, herbs, to artisanal spirits and liqueurs to create complex and flavorful cocktails. You see, cocktails have become an expression of art, something to bond over, a vital part of social gatherings, be it a business meeting or a get-together. India is creating a new corridor to Russia through Iran. This corridor bypasses Pakistan. What it also does is it counters China's CPEC. At the heart of this corridor is the Chabahar port. It is India's first offshore trading port. Today, India and Iran have signed a 10-year contract for the operation of the Shahid Beheshti terminal in Chabahar port. Our next report telling you more.
This is Chabahar port in southern Iran and on the Gulf of Oman. This is India's new trading port. New Delhi has signed an agreement with Tehran allowing the former to manage the port for 10 years. This is the first time that India will be managing an overseas port. Why Chabahar? 1. Connectivity. The Chabahar port helps connect India to Afghanistan by passing Pakistan. The port also connects India to Central Asia. 2. Geopolitics. The Chabahar port serves as a counterbalance to Pakistan's Gwadar port. This is where it is on the map, right next to Chabahar. The Gwadar port is managed by China, along with the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Gwadar acts as a tool of Chinese influence in the region. Chabahar helps India counter Chinese influence. Reports say landlocked Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have already expressed interest in using Chabahar port to access the Indian market and the Indian Ocean. Armenia too has reportedly expressed interest. 3. Connectivity to Russia. India's management of Chabahar port is part of a bigger plan. It is meant to connect India to Russia through the International North-South Transport Corridor, or what's called the INSTC. This is a 7,000+ kilometer long multi-mode transport route. It was established in the year 2000 by India, Russia and Iran. The corridor's goal is to promote transport and trade between the member states. Over the years, the INSTC has expanded to include 11 new members. These ones Azerbaijan, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Turkey, Ukraine, Belarus, Oman, Syria and Bulgaria. The international north-south transport corridor links India to lucrative markets by passing Pakistan. Analysts say the route is 30% cheaper and 40% shorter compared to the current traditional route. This transport corridor also has enormous potential for India's Southeast Asian neighbours. Analysts point out how the Suez Canal route takes 45 to 60 days. In comparison, the INSTC would take 25 to 30 days. The Chabahar port fits right into this bigger plan. This is the Shahid Beheshti terminal. India signed the contract for this terminal in 2016 during Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Iran. The contract was subject to annual renewal. 2 years later, the then President of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, visited India. Chabahar was once again discussed. In January this year, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar was in Tehran. Chabahar was discussed again. Cut to today. You have a new agreement giving India its first overseas trading port. The 10-year contract reportedly stands to be automatically renewed. It is a big day and a big win for India.